Do you have your shot glass? We have to get into the right frame of mind for this.
All right, let's bring in our guest, Gregor Purdy, strategic advisor, executive coach, chief technologist, good friend, and tequila connoisseur. Gregor, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Well, let me tell people a little bit about you too.
Sure.
Maybe they'll like you still after I tell you everything that I know about you. But look, you have a pretty strong provenance, provenance is one of my favorite words, but technology leader at Apple, Amazon, a number of companies. You've built teams, you've led big projects. Today, you're a mentor, an executive coach, a fractional CTO, right? And I think you really thrive at, look, we've worked together before, full disclosure to the community. Yeah. So I think you work really well together at the confluence of technology and business strategy, of people and culture. And it's just a really rare mix that, I've really enjoyed. I am a little bit freewheeling. You're a lot more organized and diligent. And I think that, I don't know, I hope you feel the same. I think that really worked for us when we were working together.
Thank you for all those kind words.
Well, I mean, you're constantly curious, you're constantly evolving, you develop systems and strategies and workshops and tool sets that I think so many people can benefit from. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But anyway, I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have the conversation with you. I'm always interested in things you're into as well, across the supply chain, but so many other things also, right? So every time we talk, whether it's for actual business reasons or just for fun, I come away having had a great time. And so I'm looking forward to just talking about a few things right today.
Yeah. Cool, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's great. I mean, always great having you here. And of course, we don't just do this here. So we talk aside from this, we've got ideas. We're always sort of plotting, right? And it's been a great lot of fun getting to work with you and getting to know you. This all started with Radial, right? It started.
Yeah, we were.
Was it still eBay Enterprises?
No, so Radial came out of eBay, right? So eBay Enterprise had some e-commerce platform tech in it from way back in the day when they wanted to get in that business, and that included, the web store front end bits, and it included all the operational bits, actual physical warehouses and customer service centers, multiple of them, mostly domestic, a little international. And so, like this interesting combo of all the ops heavy but tech enabled stuff, in addition to some straight tech stuff like payments, tax, and fraud, and then the web store bit as well. And I forget how many years ago it was now, but they spun out the web store part of that, and that's now called Magento, right?
Okay.
But this fast forward a couple of years, they still had the rest of it. Of course, that's if you're not wanting to be in that business, that's a tough load to carry.
Yeah.
Right. So they ended up selling that out to Sterling, and I think it was Sterling brought together one or two other partners as well. And they already had kind of in that portfolio another logistics 3PL company that they bolted together with this former eBay Enterprise piece, other than the web store, and they called it Radial, right? And I joined right after they had kind of made the decision to become this company called Radial.
That's right. You and Stefan, and I can't remember who all we met there first, but
yeah, you might have met a few of the other folks, but Stefan was sort of chief instigator of the stuff I was involved in.
Right.
I met him through my co-founder at Pro.com, Matt Williams. So when I was kind of negotiating, moving on to other things from there, after I talked to the board and to Matt and everything like that, Matt said, "Hey, why don't you talk to Stefan? He's this amazing product and strategy and marketing genius, but what he really needs is a technology guy."
Yeah.
And so I kind of met up for coffee with Stefan, and we hit it off right away. I was looking for a guy who was the great product and marketing guy to go partner with to do stuff, and he was looking for technology strategy stuff. So I ended up joining as the VP of Technology for Advanced Solutions, which is a little bit highfalutin, but really the role was around, okay, so we're going to have this new company. I mean, it's an old company, but a new company with, and we want to go after some new stuff, not just operate what we already have.
Right.
Right. And so some work had been done before I got there with a major sort of strategic consulting group to go figure out, what were the opportunities ahead of them that they might go after. And as is typically the case, it was a combination of, deep stuff they had done before, right? About like, what's the market and what's the possibilities, what's the space, and stuff that, I don't want to poo-poo it, but, because it actually takes real work to produce that stuff, right?
Right.
And there is real value in it because, they're figuring out like what's going on in the marketplace and things like that, but it's really hard to digest, right?
Yeah.
So
to distill down to something, right?
something to do, right?
Yeah.
It's not just, so it's just these massive like spreadsheets and financial models, massive, PowerPoint presentations and slide decks, and it's just, it's a lot. And having lived through it, I affectionately, let's say, call it a strategy bomb, right? And so they had received a strategy bomb,
Right.
and they paid a lot of money for it. And the question now was, now what? And the sort of now what question is where I spend a lot of my time in kind of everything I do, right? Now what, or and then what kind of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was brought in because Stefan had convinced them that what we were going to do is we were going to create a new business unit to go after some of these things. And in the end, we didn't create that separate business unit. We just worked through, and I say me combined with kind of leadership throughout the different departments within the company.
Right.
My job was to basically go through all of that and figure out what would it mean for Radial to actually go after some of these things. What would we actually do if we were to go after that? How would it fit on our existing roadmap? Would it conflict with our existing roadmap? Are we even equipped to go after it? Do we even know what it means?
Right.
So basically taking all of those sort of key things and figuring out what would it actually mean to go after them, and are we up for it? And try to figure out what's the smartest. You can't really chase 10 things at a time. So if we're going to chase something, what is it and in what order and how? And so that was my primary role. But in the midst of that, one of those had to do with kind of inventory optimization stuff. And that was how I met you actually and the Blue Ridge folks at the time.
Right.
Was because I think it was through one of the Sterling guys either knew you or knew Blue Ridge or, somehow. And so I flew down to Atlanta and met up with you and the team actually a couple of times, if I remember right.
Yeah. Well, and we went after a couple of accounts, right?
Yeah, we did. We actually were getting, some definite interest. It was hard to get to closure.
Right.
So Radial hadn't launched a new product line in a decade, right? They did not have the muscle memory of, and here's how you launch, and go for the close on something you don't already know.
Right.
And so there's a lot of kind of internal struggle around, how do we structure the sales process, and how do we make sure people are compensated, like really mundane stuff actually in a lot of ways, right? But that's kind of the making sausage part of launching a new product, right? I'm fond of, talking about, innovation, right? Everybody loves to talk about innovation, but it's really a combination of two things: invention and adoption. And, we sort of had the invention part because we invented a relationship with Blue Ridge, right? You guys had some amazing tech. We had, great presence in a different market space than you were already in. It was a marriage made in heaven in a lot of ways, right? But you haven't innovated until there's adoption. And that's really almost always the hardest part because there's so many human factors involved in it.
Do you ever look back at that and wonder, think about that. We probably shouldn't name the brands, but we were going after some major brands.
Yeah, luxury brands in particular, right? Yeah.
Right. Direct to consumer e-commerce, right? Imagine if we had been able to get that adoption, get that buy-in at those companies, and it was a slog. I recall some dark days in New York trying to get some of these companies over the line. And if they had been that well positioned when COVID hit, just imagine where they could be now. And now it's such an incredible imperative for companies. So could we say safely we were ahead of our time?
Well, I don't think being ahead of one's time is necessarily a compliment, but
That's,
okay.
I was going to say, it's
Yeah.
not always a good thing, right?
Yeah, I've been ahead of my time on so many things, actually. And you tend not to make too much money when you're ahead of your time by too far.
That's a really good point. That is a really good point. Well, so that was fantastic, because that was one of the meetings of the physical logistics world, Radial, which was largely physical logistics. It was order fulfillment. It was, as you and your team always said, everything that happens after the click.
Yeah.
Right. It was the routing the order. It was the fulfilling the order. It was even down to the detail, as I recall, of writing the little handwritten notes that were the keynote of a particular brand, or putting the bow on if to be done doing so manually, and then fulfilling the order.
A little something we like to call VAS, value added services, right?
There you go.
Value added means we're going to charge you for them. But yeah.
That's right. And then you merge that with the digital. So, we help to enable that more effectively, the right product in the right place at the right time. That's the old cliche, and it was much more than that. But I think that it was a great experience. I mean, we didn't get nearly as far along as we wanted to, but it was a great experience. But one of the things that you just said made me think about your past at Amazon, and that is, you have to do the thing, right? You can build processes, you can build documents and plans and even principles, but you don't, as you love to say, do principles. So tell me a little bit about your work at Amazon, what it was like in the early days, and what did you really take away from that experience?
Sure. So I was at Amazon from 2003 to 2005. So in today's terms, that's kind of early days, but at the time, it didn't feel like early days because there was a lot of people that have been there a lot longer, right?
Yeah.
I remember being a customer of Amazon. I hesitate to say what year that was. I think it was still
more than 2 decades ago.
I think it was still the 90s, late 90s.
Yeah.
But early on, actually, I was one of their customers. I remember the old ugly website with just a lot of blue text on it and not a lot more.
Right.
And the Amazon logo that they used to have back then with the river. So it was an interesting place to be because Amazon, especially back then, and less so now, right? But back then, the market thought of them as a retailer and valued them as a retailer in terms of stock price and all that kind of stuff. Right. Didn't understand what they were doing in terms of how they managed debt, like they were taking out notes and things instead of raising equity. And they were doing all kinds of things that nobody understood. The group that I was in, interestingly, though, was, it wasn't, a group that owned a core system of its own, right? It was a group we called the Enterprise Commerce Services, or Large Account Services, it was called at one point. Mm-hmm. And the idea was, Amazon had actually already at that time a couple of what you would call enterprise scale customers. Toys R Us was one, Target was one.
Gosh, I forgot about that.
And there was others kind of in the mix that they were pursuing, right? I was involved in the launch of the NBA store on the Amazon platform. We had got that business from someone else, and we didn't have a solution for how jersey customization was going to work, and I had to invent one.
Very cool.
Yeah. So, but at the time,
useful and practical knowledge, that kind of stuff, right? I mean, really.
Yeah. And, because it was done previously with Flash and just crazy stuff. And Amazon was basically allergic to Flash, for one thing. They didn't have anything Flash related in the platform. And, the previous provider wasn't going to give us all the magic of how to make it work, this old Flash thing, right? You weren't going to get that. We needed a different non-Flash answer, and I created one. Gosh,
I wonder how many of our listeners even remember Flash, right?
Yeah, it's so deprecated now. So anyway, so that was kind of the time frame, right? And one of the things you need to know for context before we talk about it, we'll talk mostly probably about Target, because Toys R Us at the time was in kind of a special state we like to call litigation. But Target is maybe the most interesting of the things that were under my wing at the time. So Target, if you rewind before I got there, imagine your Amazon in earlier days, right? You've got all this stuff, you're selling all this stuff online, you're starting to branch out to categories beyond books, you're doing all these things, and someone gets the idea that you're going to have enterprise customers now, and you manage to land your first one.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who's ever been through that knows there's multiple ways to achieve it, the implementation. One of the common ways to achieve it is to essentially copy and paste your infrastructure and edit it until it's the new instance. And I say it that way, not to actually throw shade on it, because, you could say it's wrong, but it's not necessarily wrong if you win with it, right?
Right.
But it's not cost free either, right? And I think that's the difference when you talk about engineering versus sort of just doing stuff, right? Engineering is, there are trade-offs, and you don't make them blindly, you actually make them knowing. And so if you're doing this as an engineering exercise, you figure out, well, we could spend 5 years making a shiny new thing and then take the new customer and start taking their money, or we could start taking their money now.
Right. And then we all know where that's going to lead.
Yeah. So,
right.
But,
which option gets selected?
It gets selected by the CEO, right?
Yep.
But if we're doing it eyes open, we can get mad later, like, hey, we created our own problems. Well, yes, we did, and we kind of did on purpose. And it was one of those kind of scenarios, right? So, interestingly, in this time frame, a little before that, actually, Bezos infamously, maybe, made his edict, like, you will do what's now known as services-oriented architecture and small teams that run independently and all that kind of stuff. You will do things that way, or you will leave. And that was famous/infamous. I think famous now, right? Because it's worked pretty well.
Because it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, it was a radical thing to just pronounce, right? We're doing that, right? We're changing everything about how we do it. And the thing is, they were winning, right? It was working, right? They were able to move faster at adding things to the Amazon platform by essentially building a new platform from the ground up the new way, right? With these small isolated teams that had more free reign. However, that creates a natural problem, right? So Target was on the old platform, and the new platform gets to move faster and make innovations faster. And the customers over there Target is over there looking like, well, we want some of that stuff too. In fact, not only is Target the customer and the humans saying that, the contract says it. The contract says, thou shalt, give us all the new features. That's why we're on your platform. Well, otherwise, why are we on your platform?
Most favored nation status or whatever, right?
Right. So they were obligated to launch all these cool features on the old platform that was too slow to create them on. So that was never going to work, right?
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening is they did end up negotiating with Target that, hey, we're going to put you on the new platform, and that Target is like, okay, you're going to get the features now, right? But that's a big project. That's potentially going to slow down any other sort of fixes and stuff that they want in the meantime, right? Because all effort's going to go towards cutting them over. And I ended up being the person with the happy task of making it work, right? So completely relaunching Target.com on the new Amazon platform. And I say completely, some of the long tail didn't actually happen until a few years later, when the person that I tasked with some things long after I had left the company sent me an email. I'm proud to report that after this many years, months, and days, this thing you told me to shut off is now off. Right. So that happened
after you've moved on to
like years later. Right. So there, awesome. The long tail is real. It's real.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was a big project. And so that was my experience at Amazon. It's different than maybe some other people's, right? Because I didn't own my thing, and, but I saw how those principles played out, because I had to go work with all those people and convince them to do what I needed them to do so that I could launch Target.
So you're a big proponent. I mean, for everything that Amazon is famous and infamous.
Deservedly so in many cases, yeah.
Yeah, you're a big fan and proponent of their business principles, right? So
yeah, I am. So
tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's 14 principles, and there's a couple things that there's maybe some magic hiding in there. And a lot of times when I talk about these, or I give a presentation about them, I work hard to kind of make the point that for the most part, these things are not they're not Amazon specific in a lot of ways. And I'll quote a couple of them to kind of give you a feel for that in a second. But
Yeah.
The specific set of 14, the way they've kind of divvied up the space and, maybe ignored a few things or rolled a few things up different, like that's specific to Amazon. But there are some timeless ideas in here that are not specific to Amazon. And for most people that have worked anywhere, maybe a big company like, Google or Microsoft or, smaller companies that are innovative and just really, making things happen, they'll recognize some of these. And I'll quote a couple of them just to give you an idea, right? So, one of these 14 principles is think big. Okay, well, a lot of people have some kind of principle that gets at think big, right?
Right.
And they have one, bias for action, which is actually one of my favorite ones. And again, a lot of people will have some kind of principle that they espouse, follow, or manage to about bias for action.
But I think, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I just have to interject here, and that is that their bias for action, and then one of their other principles is be right a lot.
A lot. Oh, yeah.
Right. So I think what's interesting is how fail early, fail fast has become really popular. And I don't argue that principally as a principle, but I think application wise, it has become an excuse for not doing the diligence that allows you to be right a lot, right? And just doing things maybe, I can't capture the term right, willy-nilly, right? You've got to make sure, in my opinion, you have to make sure that it is okay to fail. It is not okay to be a failure. And you have to still try to avoid failure as much as you can while taking a reasonable calculated risk.
Yeah, and there's a couple of fun bits to that, right? So, one of them, one of the people that I worked with back in the day, I really like, this idea that he would say of, fail in new and interesting ways, right?
I've heard you say that before,
right? I mean that's fun, and I mean, sure. But again, season to taste, right? So there's natural tensions built into these sets of principles, as you would sort of expect, I think, right? So they're in tension sometimes.
Yeah, I was going to say some of them are intentional, those tensions, correct?
Yeah. And that's actually part of the magic, because the point behind a set of principles and things like that is, isn't to disengage your mind. In fact, in sort of when I teach these things, deliver results, right? So deliver results is a big one. And one of my friends that kind of applies it advisory trade as an ex-Amazonian, super amazing guy, John Rossman actually is one of my friends, and he talks all the time about how deliver results is number one, and he's right. Deliver results is kind of number one. It sort of trumps all other things at some level, right? If what you're doing is preventing you from delivering results, probably you need to think that through again, right? So he's kind of right. Although I would argue, and sort of when I talk about this myself, I don't list it first, despite it being number one, because I treat hire and develop the best as number zero. Right. So
yes, it's the most important thing you do.
Right. And even being number one and number two, or number zero and number one, that doesn't mean number zero and number one always wins, because you can't do that either.
Right.
Right. So for all these things, you have to keep your brain engaged. You can't just cargo cult your way through this stuff. Right. Oh, there's 14 principles. I'm just going to adopt them. They're already written. Let's just put them on the wall. Now we're done. It's problem solved. Right. No.
Right.
And in fact, the no cargo culting idea is actually in my framework for, I call it the Stronger Companies framework, where I've gone down below the Amazon principles to things you can do based on my own experience at Amazon, and kind of looking at some of the things that my friends write about and things like that. I kind of synthesized, this big body of, okay, so you want to go after one of these principles. What does that look like? Well, here's some things you can do, or see if you are doing, or if you are doing them effectively, and sort of structured as maturity models. And so that's really important, right? Is, it's not just, here's 14 and they're in some order, go. Right. But it's also not 14 and choose one or two and ignore the rest, go.
Right.
And in no scenario is it like that. right? Although
You
I
have
will
to
tell you,
consider the tension and the collaboration between each of those,
yeah,
right?
yeah, that's right. And I
Ignore at
would,
your peril, sort of.
yeah, and I think that there's some good news hiding, however, right? So part of what I do sometimes is I do diagnostics with people on their company. Hey, you have this symptom, do you have that symptom? And I use that to help me figure out like where we should focus. Um,
Yeah, we
but
piloted your Stronger
you
Companies
did,
framework at Curo, right?
you
It
did
was
actually.
brilliant. It really is brilliant. I mean, I think it, one of your principles, and I know I want us to get to this. I really want us to get to this. But one of your principles is it's 14 principles. You can't apply them all at once. And
That's
some of
right.
them may not be applicable for you in your business at that time. And
That's right.
this framework that you provided us was so valuable because it allowed us to go, we're ready for that one. We're
Yeah.
not ready for this one.
Yeah,
Right.
and it changes over time, right? It changes with
Yeah.
what's going on around you, and that's important. And that's why I say sort of no cargo culting or no simple answer, right? But again, there is some good news hiding, right? And there's some work that I have done, kind of analyzing this body of between 200 and 300 individual practices that you might go after. I did some analysis around what principles each of them support and how that would net out to would that teach you anything ultimately about where to focus.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out there is kind of you can there's a couple different ways to think about it, but since we're doing just talking, right? So you could think about it as what is the center of mass, right, of these principles and the things you might go after and do. Because again, we've talked about, and we're dancing around it a little bit, but you can't do a principle where you have to do practices, I call them, right?
Right.
um, you know what is the center of mass, or what is, if you don't know any better, where should you start? It's sort of that idea, right? And you've got a clue that comes at you from this idea of, I say hire and develop the best is kind of number one or zero, right? My friend talks about how deliver results is number one, and he's right. It turns out there's kind of this cluster at the center. They're all important in different ways, right? But if you look at hire and develop the best, invent and simplify, deliver results, and customer obsession, not focus, obsession,
Right.
right? If you didn't know any better where to start and you started there, if you were good at what you did, if you chose the right things to do, you'd actually be pretty well off, right?
Yeah,
Because
really solid core, right?
that's right. And a lot of the things that you would be doing while you were doing that would be tendrils out that are sort of building up strengths in your organization that would help you get to bias for action, or get to think big, or get to learn and be curious, or earn trust, and all these other ones, right? So you could kind of get there in fewer steps if you built your core strength. It's like when you're doing physical training, you want to get your core strong, and with a strong core, you've got a good starting point to go after a bunch of other stuff. And so you can actually cheat a little, and shortcut it a little.
Sure.
The details are still what to actually do based on that, or how to decide whether you're doing the right things, or if you're doing well, and those sorts of things. But if you started with that core set of 4 before you knew any better, you'd actually, in many cases, still be pretty much better off.
So when you take on a fractional role like you did with us at Curo, or many other places you do, or you do executive coaching or something like that, do you bring this framework along with you?
Yeah, so sometimes it's used implicitly and sometimes explicitly. It kind of depends a little on what we're doing, and how interested actually the client is in that. Some people like having a really structured way, like with the diagnostic survey I did with you and things like that,
Yep.
that helps people kind of get from point A to point B in their mind.
Yeah.
Other people, they want to kind of just dive right in and block and tackle and troubleshoot on stuff. And in those cases, a lot of times what I'm doing is applying these principles behind the scenes, either explicitly or just implicitly, because that's my background.
Right.
And using it to kind of navigate them. And I usually
Through the
end up
blocking and tackling. Yeah.
through the blocking and tackling, right? How do you choose your target, and how do we go after the target enough? Like, you don't stop going after that target too early, kind of thing, right? So
it seems like you had worked up kind of a framework here, and maybe had even offered it I don't know in mass, but do you offer this as a kind of a framework in a box for people, or how do you get the word out? Because I can tell you that it was incredibly valuable for us. I mean, we only got to use it for about a year and a half, right?
Mhm.
But and then we were effectively sold. So, but I mean, do you offer this to companies to self-execute? It
I
seems like
don't.
that would be really hard, but
Yeah, I don't, because the principle, like, so, control the customer experience,
yeah,
right? Right. So I could not control the customer experience well if I did that.
yeah,
Um, so typically what ends up happening is somebody's interested in using me in one of these ways, as an executive coach, or as a mentor for a new person newly in a leadership role, or on a board, or as an advisor, strategic or otherwise. um, they're already interested in me because of my background at Apple, Amazon, startups, and all these other things that I've done.
right.
And the framework ends up being just the method of delivery. I've toyed with the idea of putting, kind of the one of the surveys up as like a lead-in thing, let people try it out, and then, on some online app or something, and get some feedback. But I found that, it's not quite so automatable, because so much of it is bound up in navigating, and I've built tools to try to help teach people to self-navigate. um, but it still ends up being a lot of uh, very situational stuff that comes
Well,
up. It's my ability to ask kind of penetrating follow-up questions that helps me to do the navigational part. So
your
the answer
advice,
is no.
your
It's
advice on that is to get help somewhere if you want to apply these principles, right? It's sort of
Yeah,
for hospitals. If you can't get help with Gregor,
yeah.
get help
Do
somewhere.
help
Don't try
somewhere.
to, right? Do not try this at home.
Yeah, I do have one tool that I've created that is kind of intended as something that once you learn it, you can self-apply it. So it's smaller than kind of this larger, I call it the stronger companies framework, right?
Yeah,
It's smaller than that. Um, but even that one, I don't sell it as like a retail product. What I do is I do a workshop, which is pretty easy to get into, right? So if you got 10 or more people, you can get into a workshop. These days, of course, we deliver it virtually. But every participant in the workshop gets their own, I call it the superpower pack. And it's a deck of cards that we do a very structured set of exercises with, that help people find and develop their leadership superpowers to deliver positive results.
yeah.
Right. And so and interestingly, that one, the Amazon principles are linked in it. Like, I've taken the time to sort of show where they show up in the content, but all of the content is not in the language of the Amazon leadership principles. It's the lessons that I have learned through all these years of doing this, captured into a product and a workshop that goes around it. And a process that you can use to essentially, you can use it to self-evaluate if you're just a solo person. You can use it, if you're, nobody needs to know you're using it. So people use it sometimes to, if they're doing reviews for their team might not know they're using it, but you could use it to get your thoughts together about, who's doing what well and what not well. You can use it to set yourself up if you've got a coaching conversation coming up with somebody you work with, either as a mentee or an employee. You can use it again to sort of pull out of yourself the important parts, because if you're going to have a coaching conversation with somebody, one of the most important things is to be genuine and to give valuable insight. But another one is, don't give them 8 things to follow up on, because again, you can't follow up on 8 things. You want to give them 1 or 2, and not at random. You want to give them the 1 or the 2. And how do you get there? Well, you can get there on your own, but you can use a tool like Superpower Pack to help you get there with more assurance, and that you've kind of covered the space, because it's designed to prompt you to think about the whole space. And then to
No,
narrow, using Amazon principles for how it's structured. It's using things like stack ranking, which is an Amazon practice. It's not a principle, it's a practice.
right.
No ties, put them in order, go. Right. Stack ranking is super, super powerful for decision making. And the stack ranking is built into the way the Superpower Pack works at a couple of different levels, to force you to have those hard conversations with yourself, or if there's a partner you're working with, have those hard conversations about what's really most important, this or that.
So I don't even know this. and we talk all the time, and I don't even know this. Are you looking for additional companies to work for that want this kind of thing? I mean, if someone was interested, if they were watching this and they were interested, I mean, I suppose we should have them reach out to you, right?
Yeah, so I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, and that's the best way to get me. I get a lot of inbounds from there on various things. And we can take it quickly to like a call, a Zoom call, phone call, or to email or whatever for somebody that's interested. But a lot of times what I do is, I'll take an inbound from LinkedIn, set up a call, and then just get to know like who are you, what you're working on, and just get that first sort of conversation going. And usually what happens is out of that, it's clear, right? Do they need something more like superpower pack where they can get a little bit of input in a workshop type format and then they can run with it? I have one customer that adopted wholesale in their company. Everybody got a superpower pack. Wow. And they used it to structure. They used the language of the superpower pack to rewrite all their job specs and leveling guides so that the people who were being reviewed could know, I'm at this level, here's what it takes to get to the next level, and here's a tool to help you self-evaluate in between, and we're going to use this language when we give you feedback, so you can be very intentional about, where you're at, why, and what to do, what to get better at in order to proceed.
And nothing's lost in translation. That sounds so powerful. Everyone is literally speaking the same language, right?
So even if you have your own language, which many people do, a lot of the ideas in Superpower Pack or the Stronger Companies framework, a lot of those ideas you could, translate them, right? You could use a different word if you want, if you have a different favorite way of talking about it, or, if you're allergic to some particular practice because of some history at the company, you can, reinterpret that practice in a way that makes sense for your company, right? It's not trying to turn you into a robot. Yeah. Right. It's trying to get you onto tracks that will be productive.